Hey everyone, it is time to review the then request code C. For those who want to check the game, don't worry, I won't spoil any important part about it, but it is going to be imperative to talk about the previous entries, just to point some things to make sense here and there. Now the question may be, are we going to have this game on the West? No idea, to be honest. I haven't seen any particular news about it, but Amazon and the official page have the games, so most likely we will receive it. But I decided to get the Japanese version because to me it is kinda childish trying to censor these kinds of games. I mean, they even say plus 18 years old in the bots, and most likely here they will be rated mature. But I don't know. In the gameplay section I'll explain why I believe it was targeted like that. In any case, I'll censor certain things because of reasons. Without further ado, let's check the usual topics. The then request code C begins showing us a destroyed city and our main antagonist, Mitsunashi Arata, who seems to be orchestrating bugs left and right, bugs that are annihilating everything in front of them. Worth mentioning that all of this is being narrated by Alice, a Ludens found in the first game. As the narrative advances, then it shows two characters who are pretty much beat, Shina and Sayaka, where Shina says that they are not bugs, but Arata replies that he is letting her live because of an old friendship. While Arata is distracted, Mei uses her hatchet to attack him, but things didn't go quite well, as he is protected by a sea of bugs that cling to Mei's arm, devouring it in a matter of seconds. After this event, Arata starts to get close to Shina, telling her to let Sayaka choose if she wanted to go with him or suffer some more. Shino responds that Sayaka would never follow him. A bit annoyed by this answer, he tries to wake Sayaka, asking her if she remembers her role. However, seems like she is kind of unconscious, so Arata keeps pushing comments like "try to remember since the beginning." That's when Sayaka starts to talk to herself, wondering how things reach this point, and that she needs to organize her ideas diving deep into her memory, when she wasn't herself. This is how Chapter 0 begins. For those who played the first game, you know perfectly well where is this place. This is where the game asks us to choose between I have no idea about this place and I remember it, the strain area. While here Sayaka hears the voice of a man and a woman arguing, where Iris says that she has no time for this, but another character asks her if she understands what he's trying to do, stating that the actions between people and the cult are not that different. Then a third person starts to say that the guests have arrived. So Alice transports herself in front of Sayaka, explaining that she was born from the game and people's memory. This is where Alice asks the player if it has been a while or a new hello. Of course, if you answer it's been a while, Alice, she asks us if it is okay to call us Shino-O or King of Death, then again reference to the first game. Then she says that this Ludens is the new key for this game, referring to Sayaka, but she seems to be kinda hollow. There are no reactions or anything, so Alice says that she's going to play, but she's not going to do anything wrong. From here, I believe we can stop this intro and start explaining some general things. The first chapters in this game are going to be confusing, because Shina gets to meet Sayaka and they start to live together. However, Sayaka has no real emotions or particular interactions, like she has no idea what's going on. Ironically, she's the only one who's able to see the King of Death, or as the player, having different interactions with us, as she finds it curious. Now here, her role in the story is of a debugger, having to enter into World's Odyssey DLC. I know this may be like, what? Don't worry that much, the game explains what's going on. Inside of this game, Sayaka finds about her true powers, and also about the weird events that will eventually reach this world. But returning to the idea about the first chapters being confusing, it is because you will read certain things that are not true. For example, Shina explains how she died and how she became a Ludens. But if you've played the first game, most likely your honest reaction will be, no, it didn't happen like that. So there will be several interactions that will take you off guard, and then some heavy idle chatter where I was like, no, please no hagas estas mamadas Idea Factory, Biat. Yeah, in all honesty I didn't even record those moments because they don't really add to the story. But I will say, as chapters pass, the narrative becomes better and better. And in all honesty, it was a roller coaster of emotions, because you start to get the pieces of the puzzle, and by chapter 4, everything starts to make much more sense. And things start to escalate as Sayaka regains her personality, because of all the events happening around her. Now, if your memory is a bit hazy about all the previous events, don't worry. The game does a good work refreshing those ideas with images of the previous games, so you get what they are exactly talking about. And just to end this section, the game asks you to finish at least chapter 9, but chapter 10 is like, well, if you want to know more, I will say it is also important to finish it and get the full picture of where this is pointing to, as well as this message that is nothing new, as Idea Factory shared information like 8 months ago, so yep, there will be a Dead End Request 3. To me the story gets an 8. I do believe it delivered an intriguing narrative in multiple moments. Unfortunately, I cannot discard those events where you also want to fast skip things, as they don't really add to the journey. Gameplay-wise, Code C changes radically to a roguelike game, where 3 difficulties will be presented. I played on normal, because these kinds of games tend to be up to RNGesus, and yep, on higher difficulties you may want to abandon the game, because you can lose your progress if you die or if you leave the dungeon, so it becomes quite harsh. Here you need to advance through different floors finding the exit, until you reach the end, to then check some events and return to the world. What may take you off guard is that this is not an action game, but more like a grid movement, similar to old school approaches. I will say that the hardest part was getting used to the control, like how to move diagonally, meticulously check my number of attacks and steps, because between those actions you can mess up real good. Through the dungeon you will find different items like cures, debuffs, which sometimes have special upgrades to increase your weapon's defense, attack, or other special things. The orange ones are hacks, or special moves that deal much more damage. The yellow ones are money, and the light blue gives you reason leaves, which are important to traverse the dungeon, as you can lose your sanity as you move or get hit. And as this number is reduced, your vision is reduced, losing sight of icons on the dungeon. In the last moments you start to receive good chunks of damage and your vision is pretty much like 2 steps ahead, turning the game into an impossible task, so always carry several leaves. Later I'll explain what happens, but we need the little kids to abandon the video first. Whatever the case, here the RPG elements are quite basic. All you can equip is your sword and some hacks obtained with the purple items. And every time you die, you will unlock points to increase skills that help you to reduce damage, avoid certain Asarus elements and stuff like that. And yep, it is through game overs that you get these points. As you advance in this story you will have to fight bosses in the last floor. Most of times they are quite tricky, so try to get rid of them as fast as possible. The only real option I saw here was buff and debuff like there's no tomorrow, because sometimes they have special moves that can ruin your day. In general they are quite fast if you abuse the options given to you, so my best recommendation is once again finish them fast, because it is frustrating when they start to struggle and from one turn to another you see something outrageous. What is cool is that by beating these enemies you can get new weapons with different effects, like attacking 2 sides at the same time, extra damage, extra range, to recover HP and so on. However, keep in mind that they require 1 turn to be equipped, and that your bag has but limited space. That is also expanded as you beat these enemies. But that is not the hardest part in this game, because while diving into the dungeon you'll start to see glitch girls. If you see these enemies spawn, your best option is to run. At first it is but a bad idea to fight them head on, as they deal a lot of damage, but there are some trophies if you beat them. So the best you can do is, if you're going to engage in combat, buff your character with double damage, extra speed, and transform Sayaka. If it is possible, also debuff them by reducing their defense or attack. The first battles are manageable, but as you may have noticed you need several items, so it is not a good idea to engage every single time, plus sometimes they can appear on every single floor. And there is one glitch girl that has a broken move, so RNGesus has to be on your side. And to spice things up, throughout the dungeon there are multiple traps that have different effects like dealing lots of damage, reduce your speed, transport you wherever they want, and so on. The best you can do is tread carefully and use items to check if there are traps. However, you can also add skills to smooth experience, as it is not realistic to check every single step, as time will be against you, And to add the cherry on top in this whole mess, sometimes you will have rescue quests, where you need to reach the exit without losing your companion. Fortunately, they are not that useless, as sometimes they can buff your characters. There are certain portals that can be used to return, but the glitch girls oftentimes target these crystals, so the worst thing that can happen is that the game is completely against you, forcing you to go through the whole dungeon once again. Fortunately, it doesn't change, but man. Now, this is a good moment to talk about why I do believe this game was cancelled this time. If you play the previous games, you know that Dead End has some gory moments that will make you question a thing or two, as sometimes they are quite explicit. These are no news, but Code C definitely took another step into that direction. And the thing is that 80% of the times you die, something horrible happens to Sayaka. If you lose your sanity, for example, Sayaka starts to hurt herself in confusion. So in that end, we can see how she pretty much opens her stomach. There are some rocky bugs similar to Onyx that pretty much disfigures her heroine. But the cherry on top, at least of the ones I saw, is with one bug that is on the ground. Now, use your imagination, I am not going to explain any of that, but after reading what happened I was like, damn, things escalated quite fast. So yeah, there are multiple moments that can be disgusting in different ways. My guess is that they will have to change those moments. Through the story there are other things that made rise some eyebrows, but not like the way certain deaths are described. Probably one of the light ones is that she gets confused by a certain monster and she jumps out of the strain area. But aside from that, most ends were like, ah, yikes. To me its gameplay is a 7. I do believe it was decent. I would be lying if I said that I didn't have fun. But with all the previous things explained, yep, it isn't going to be a game for everyone. Fortunately, you don't need to do something as outrageous as in a Spectral Tower where you need to go through 1000, 10,000 floors. The biggest number here was 40, worst case scenario 80 floors if you need to go down and up because of what I explained. And it is fair to say that there are worse games with this similar idea, but also better executions. In the graphics section I check game performance, glitches, aesthetics and other technical things. This is the PS5 version of the game, where I had one particular issue. In chapter 8 for some reason after passing floor 6 I was unable to move Sayaka. So what I had to do is throw an item from my things, quit the game and load the data. That way you start from the floor you left and you regain control. It was a weird glitch. A few weeks ago there was a new patch but I had no idea if it was addressed. Aside from that, I had no other issues with the game turning laggy or stuff like that. But this incident happened like 90% of the times I tried that dungeon. And I remember it really well as I had to repeat it several times. Unfortunately things don't really improve here, because you will find similar executions like 70% of the game, turning the experience stagnant after a while. And I believe things can turn way worse if you need to retry several times the same dungeon, so you will see the same places, some repainted enemies and that's it. Aside from that, I would say that the main ideas were of my liking, having these chibi characters that look quite charming. The same with other enemies we find along the way, and the general art presented was quite interesting. Worth mentioning that you can see a lot of references to the previous games in posters and monitors. For example, here we can see a certain point from World's Odyssey. Here, one of the dungeons from the first game, so I believe it was worth paying attention to all those little details. As for its artwork, my only complaint is about the softcover. Aside from that, it was also quite interesting to check the different ideas before having the final product. I will give it a 7. And last but not least, its music. Code C reuses several tracks presented in the previous games. Fortunately, I will say that 80% of the good ones, because some peculiar pieces were left behind. At least I would have liked to have Chaos on a Loop, Alt Silence, Murderous Genome, Integrated Circuit Corrosion, and others like that, but it is what it is. Here a track that received several remixes was The Eternal Journey to Reality, but let's be honest, it is probably one of the best in the whole series, as it is composed in a way that at least to me it feels like as if there is light at the end of the tunnel, considering how these characters have to go through so much BS to reach their reality, so to speak. Most compositions have electronic and metal, kinda going for some djent approaches. I will say that they fit quite well the atmosphere of the game. as sometimes they have amazing combinations with some piano notes in between. I consider they add a lot of personality. As for the new tracks, probably my favorite one is when Sayaka transforms. It is a remix from the Eternal Journey to Reality, but it was changed in a way where it has a heavier rhythm, where the piano is used in a quite amazing way, because they go through the notes of the already mentioned piece, but in a much slower tempo. I consider that these rearrangements did the trick quite well. Unfortunately, this transformation lasts for few turns if you attack with it. However, not everything is that good. I do believe there are some sound effects that have to be worked a bit more. For example, when your sanity is really low you start to hear something like a heartbeat, but it cracks the general audio. I'll put a bit of it so you can hear what I mean. My main issue with that is that there are some scenes where you can keep listening that heartbeat, diminishing a bit the experience. Probably a good idea is to reduce a bit the sound effects and check how it goes. And what is funny is that some enemies do some sounds that are like your classic Japanese attempt. For example. So yeah, some sounds are a bit awkward to hear. With this, I would say that the general soundtrack is an 8. It is quite good, but we have heard a good chunk of tracks from the previous games. They go quite well, but I would have liked to hear newer and original compositions, and some sound effects needed some extra work. The Dan Request Code C final score is a 7.5. It is slightly above decent, but it is a game that I cannot recommend for everyone, as its gameplay may feel clunky and repetitive due to how things flow here. However, what kept me playing until the end was that story, which hits multiple topics in an interesting way, not just with the game narrative, but also some critiques to society in late chapters. With this, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.